Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing so well today, Tim, because we have a guest on who is an old friend of ours who we haven't spoken to in a little while, and it was really great to reconnect with him. But Tim, I want to reconnect with your mood and your emotions. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for asking. And yeah, you're right. We have reconnected with our old friend Josh Hallmark in this conversation. And Josh Hallmark, of course, is the host and one of the main investigators of True Crime Bullshit, which is a fantastic serialized podcast about serial killer Israel Keyes and really trying to find out what other victims he has. And you'll hear Josh talk about sort of why he is on this journey and what real life implications his show has.
Right. Not only for the survivors, the family members of victims and potential victims of Israel Keyes, but also for him. Every time we talk to him, I feel like he's saying to us, this is probably going to be the last deep dive on Keyes for me. And then we talked to him about it. And he's like, it's like, and he says it in this interview, time goes by. He's thinking, I'm going to wrap this up. And then something happens. And he keeps uncovering all of these details, and he keeps making new alliances with people who are either law enforcement, family members, journalists, scientists, just somebody else who's like, I got something new. Maybe it's connected to Keyes. So this is a rabbit hole that Josh has gone deep, deep, deep down, and probably deeper than anybody's gone for a serial killer. That is an independent podcaster.
Yeah, I don't know anyone who's gone deeper. So yeah, it is an impressive deep dive. And also, Josh has an event coming up this weekend, the 18th through the 20th of October. And it's a podcast festival. It's called the Berkshire Podcast Festival, and it's in North Adams, Massachusetts. Anyone who is listening to this before the festival kicks off can still likely get tickets to this fantastic event.
Yeah, support the independent podcasters. Tim and I had prior commitments, so we're not able to make it this year, but it's definitely on our calendar for the future, next year, whenever he plans it. And that area that he's doing the podcast festival, you said it's the Berkshire Podcast Festival. The Berkshires are a beautiful area in Massachusetts, in western Massachusetts. This time of year is gorgeous. So give yourself a long weekend. Head out there on Thursday. Hit up the podcast festival on the weekend. Check out the foliage. Seriously, it's a beautiful, beautiful section of New England. And also, while you're checking out things that Josh Hallmark has done, check out his website, both.and.fyi. That's both. and.fyi. It's all of his shows, links to the podcast festival, and you can also go directly to the podcast festival's website at berkshirepodcastfestival.com. Super easy.
All right, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. We hope you attend the Berkshire Podcast Festival. Let us know how it was if you do. And make sure to check out True Crime Bullshit, and make sure to follow us on social media at Missing CSM.
And make sure to stick around for Josh Hallmark after we take a quick break for a couple of commercials.
Welcome back to the podcast, Josh Hallmark. How are you today?
I'm good. It feels like it's been forever. It's good to see your faces.
It's great to see your face. You're looking handsome as ever. What's going on? What are you using for skincare nowadays?
Stress, water, Botox. I mean, you name it.
You name it. Well, off air, just before we started talking, we were saying congrats on the Berkshire Podcast Festival, and you said that it was coming along, and then we had this conversation about how we're just not able to allow ourselves to enjoy a moment without there being like something difficult. Can we just unpack that a little bit more? Because it was a really funny moment.
Yeah, I've spent the last few weeks like laying in bed late at night being like, there's nothing wrong, which means surely there's something catastrophic going on. Like, it's like, it feels too easy, so surely I must have forgotten something very important. That's how I live my life, though. Anytime I'm happy, I'm like, well, this doesn't feel right. This feels ominous.
Yeah, just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
It's hilarious, and it's so true. And we can definitely relate to you on that, because there is this feeling of like, maybe it's the true crime that we're always surrounded by. But there is this feeling of, like Tim said, the other shoe's going to drop. But you seem to have everything under control. You're doing great with your shows, and the podcast festival is coming together. Like this is looking really good. So you should be feeling good.
Thanks. I'm glad it seems that way. I'm glad I'm projecting success.
All right. Well, we do want to get into the Berkshire Podcast Festival, but before we do, tell us a little bit about you. If a listener has never heard of you, the few that may be listening, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I am Josh Hallmark. I produce a handful of shows. I run the studio Both and out of Berkshire County, Massachusetts. And I'm most well known for a show called True Crime Bullshit, which is going on 11-year investigation into serial killer Israel Keyes. So that we are on our 6th season, but I started investigating him back in 2013, and it's been a slow burn, but we've had some great successes lately, and it's starting to feel like the investigation is becoming quite fruitful.
And might I say that your website for Both and is quite elegant.
I try. See, where I fail in having success, I like to project it.
Well, it's certainly projected very well on the website. Am I reading this right? It is bothand.fyi?
Yeah, the thing is, we're running out of comms real fast, so I just, like, rather than coming up with some stupid website name so I could have the comm, I was like, I'm just going to go for one of these, like, Z-list URLs.
Well, it definitely stands out because FYI, like it's for your information, Both and for your information. I love it.
Yeah, do with it what you please.
Exactly. And it is a great website, and I encourage people to check it out. And I also encourage those who haven't listened to True Crime Bullshit to definitely listen to that. If you are a fan of true crime, I mean, this is like the quintessential, hey, I'm going to lock onto a crime and I'm going to follow it as deeply as I can. And this one happens to be the crimes of Israel Keyes and your relationship with him. I mean, you didn't have a personal relationship with him, but over the course of the years, you must have felt like you knew him. And I think we've had this conversation before. Like, have you ever thought that this was too much for you?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, I always say, like, as I approach the season finale of each season, I'm like, this is my last season. I can't do this anymore. And then something happens. Like, inevitably, the show usually ends in May, and then in April, something happens where it's like, oh, God, we've got at least another year of this. So I've kind of accepted that this is probably just my life now, for better or worse. But yeah, it's a lot to take on. And I think, like, my relationship with, the case version of Keyes changes all the time. And sometimes I'm like, God, I thought I knew him and I don't know him at all. And then that's a weird thing to think about, like this dead serial killer that you have a parasocial relationship with. It's a strange way to exist in the world, where I just see everything through the lens of a dead serial killer who I've been obsessed with for more than a decade, who never knew I existed. Thank God.
Well, take us through what you've been doing on the show. I want to hear about the developments because I know there's been some really interesting stuff. But if you could, start with like why you did this deep dive in the first place.
Yeah, so I just always looked at this case and thought, if what the FBI is saying, and it turns out I don't think they actually believe there's only 11 victims, but if what they're saying is true, that there's 11 victims, that means there's at least 8 missing people whose loved ones don't have answers. And I just kept thinking about that and, like, the torture and the idea that this guy was going to get away with, like, taking all these secrets with him. And I just thought, with, a high level of hubris and naivety, that, like, I could go out into the world and solve these crimes that the FBI couldn't. So that's how it started. And we were using the Keyes timeline and the FBI files as our primary tools. And just as that started to feel like we had really exhausted them, we developed, like, a whole new toolkit. We started doing data mining using online and digital leaks to find information on Keyes. And then we started going out into the field with more pitfalls and successes, but then we linked up with a team of guys who were actually skilled at going out into the field. So they started doing boots on the ground searches, and then we started going through social media from 10, 15 years ago, looking for people who believed they had encountered keys. And sure enough, we found a tip from some guy down in Louisiana who swore up and down that he met keys out in a spillway right before his arrest, and that when he found out Keys was arrested, he went back and found a Home Depot bucket full of weapons and tools, and he reported it to local law enforcement. And as far as he knows, they never did anything with it. And we started looking at this tip, and the timeline worked. We knew Keys was in the area at the time. We knew Keys was planning on moving to the area, so it would make sense for him to like hide a cache or a kill kit down there. And everything about where this was found matched what we thought. You know, he usually buried them near boat ramps and power lines so he could quickly cut through a wooded area. And then somewhere in the pines, this other great Keys podcast where they're out trying to find his caches, they had theories about, you know, him hiding his caches under garbage so he could see from the road if they were undisturbed. And this cache was hidden under an abandoned deep freezer. So, you know, I shared that tip with them. We talked about its viability, and then they happened to have a meeting with the FBI a week later, brought it to them, and the FBI, Ted Holla, said, yeah, my mind was blown because we have all these maps we pulled from Keys's computer, and one of them was this area with a little 2 circled exactly where you guys are saying this cache was found. And they had never... New Orleans PD had never reached out to them, so they had no idea this existed. So, you know, people keep saying we found it. We didn't. We identified Keys cache, but from that, the FBI has now said they have 70 maps like this Laplace, Louisiana map that they pulled from his computer, and they had never really looked at them because they were so zoomed in that they couldn't identify what the maps were of. But now that they know that they could lead to potential evidence in Keys's crimes, they're getting a whole team together and analyzing these maps one by one, trying to determine where they are and look for evidence.
Wow. Okay, so that's those are maps from Israel Keys' computer when it was confiscated, and that's the FBI still able to access those maps.
Yeah, thank God.
Wow. And can you explain what a kill kit is, or what is in a typical Keys cache or kill kit?
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things Keys is most known for is burying these caches or kill kits all over the country that he would then use in a crime months or years later. And it was a way to distance himself from the purchases. So like if he goes and buys duct tape in an area or goes and buys rope in an area, it's 2 years before he uses them in a crime. So if they are looking at transactions at the time of the crime, they're not going to see him buying any of these tools or weapons. The other thing is, so he would have access to everything everywhere he went all at once. And the Somewhere in the Pines guys believe, and I'm inclined to agree with them, that there were multiple types of caches. So there's the kill kit, but there's also a body disposal kit. There's a trophy kit. There's a money cache. There's a rape kit. And most of these kits or caches are going to be buried or hidden near each other, so he can access them fairly easily. And we do have evidence of that. He had 2 caches in Essex, Vermont, which he used in conjunction with the abduction and murder of the couriers, a couple from there. And this map that the FBI found, in addition to the 2 that marked where this cache was found, there were about 10 other circled numbers on the map that we believe are caches, kill kits, potentially remains, or banks that he was planning on robbing. So, you know, it's the first cache to ever be found without Keys's help. It's only the 3rd cache to ever be recovered. And so we're thinking this might actually blow the whole door open on the investigation, because now we literally have treasure maps of everywhere he was active.
I mean, there could be hundreds of these.
Yeah, he said less than a dozen, but he said that about everything. They'd be like, how many people did you kill? Less than a dozen. How many banks did you rob? Less than a dozen. How many caches? Less than a dozen. So it just feels like bullshit. And I don't think he would need 70 topographic maps for less than a dozen caches.
And you said that there was one for trophies.
Yes.
What is this?
So he never flat out said I have trophy caches, but he would say, like, I like to keep things, and they would ask, oh, so you have trophies? And he would go, no, I don't do trophies. And they'd be like, but you like to keep things. And then he'd be like, I don't want to talk about it. And then there are items we know that disappeared with his victims that were never recovered. So we're fairly certain that there are caches with trophies. Samantha Koenig's ponytail was never recovered. Some of the courier's belongings were never recovered. So there are some indications on the timeline that he would commit a crime and then go to the woods with evidence, and then that evidence would never be recovered.
And you said some of these different kinds of caches were buried near each other. How would he know where they were, once he got to one of them?
Well, I think these maps, I think he was marking them on maps. Also, we have found for the caches that have been recovered and the caches he told the FBI about that have not been recovered, there's a few things in common. They're all near boat ramps. They're all under power lines. And most of them have been buried underneath garbage or items left in the wilderness. So, he always made a joke, people don't like picking up trash. So that, and then just the timeline, what I've been trying to do is, on his last 2 trips before his arrest, he robbed a bank and then also used a victim's debit card to pull money out of her account. So we've been trying to account for all the money that he had when he was arrested versus the money that he gained from this bank robbery and the ATM transactions. And from that, we can tell there is missing money. So then it's like, okay, when could this money have disappeared? And then where was he at that time? So I think just deeply analyzing both his patterns and behaviors, the things he said, but also where he was and what kind of money he had with him at any given time is our best bet to figure out, when he was creating these caches. And then hopefully once the FBI is able to analyze all these maps, we can find the caches. And even if there are no trophies or evidence in any of them, their existence in a particular place and having an idea of when they were buried will probably lead us to victims.
And that seems to be the most important part of all this, is identifying an individual who might be missing for years and not known to be one of the victims of keys. Is that, in fact, your main drive in doing this?
That is 100% what drives me. And I wanted to move on from keys a while ago. You guys know I was doing a humanities podcast before all this, and I was like, well, true crime is where the listeners are. I guess I'll dabble in that, and then maybe I can convert my audience. And then here I am years later still doing the same case. But I think it was there was this sense of responsibility after 2 years of doing this, where it was like, okay, I've opened this door. I can't just close it and abandon it. So I'm in it, and I've made friends with potential victims' family members. I've made friends with his family. I've made friends with the family members of missing people who have questions about keys. And so I feel like, and I'm sure this is more my own internal crap than anything from anyone else, but I just feel like I can't just walk away from that at this point.
What's it like when you are introduced to a potential victim's family and they start asking you questions? How does that process in your own head? And what type of questions do they open with? It's
funny because of the 3 that I talk to the most frequently, they rarely ask questions. They mostly just want me to know about their loved one. Like, here's the stuff that I would love for the audience to know about this person. And we've always wondered what happened, or we didn't agree with the police's narrative of what happened. And so I'm glad you're doing this. And even if it's not keys, I'm glad you're shining a light on my loved one. I think that's 90% of the conversations. They might ask, what makes you think it was keys, or is there any possibility it wasn't? And I always say, until we have irrefutable DNA evidence, we'll never know it was keys. So I don't ever want to insinuate that we know for a fact it was keys, or even if we have all the circumstantial evidence in the world, it's empty until we have actual evidence. But yeah, it's mostly just conversations not about Keyes, but about their loved one and how to best tell their story and who they were, and making sure that I'm keeping them in the loop as we find out new things. But yeah, it's interesting. It is super scary because I always say there's like no one right way on how to talk to family members, but there's a million wrong ways. And there's also like not a single archetype for grieving family. Everyone reacts to things very, very differently. And so it's hard to navigate, and you always just think like, at the end of the day, I hope I'm not re-traumatizing someone, and I hope that I'm doing their loved one justice. That's the thing that keeps me up at night the most. It's not Keyes. It's like, am I doing more good than harm, and am I going to disappoint someone or hurt someone?
And I've probably asked you this one before, but how many victims do you believe Keyes actually has?
It changes all the time. I would say somewhere between 15 and 25 seems the most realistic, just based on his travels and details he has shared about his victims.
Wow. And how confident are you that the FBI has the motivation to continue working on this now, so many years after his death?
Very. It's funny. I kind of did not give them the benefit of the doubt because it didn't seem, from our perspective, like they were working on it. But Ted Halla, who I think is one of two agents who are still actively pursuing the case, amongst many other things that they're working on, has insinuated that his forced retirement is coming up, and he wants to move the needle on this case as much as possible before that happens.
His forced retirement?
Yeah, in the FBI, you have a forced retirement at a certain age. They're like, done with you.
Gotcha. Same with podcasters.
Yeah, totally. Unfortunately, not with politicians.
Exactly. And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. So this agent is actively still working on the case. What does some movement look like for him?
I think anything at this point. There's been no hard evidence in this case since 2013. So I think he's of the same mind. And I have my first meeting with him in a couple of weeks, but the Somewhere in the Pines boys, who are on the Both And Network, who we've been working in collaboration for about 8 months now, they have said, like, this could be the beginning. This could be the thing that changes everything, because now we know what these maps mean. We know that they have value. And if there's 70, even if only one leads to one cache, it's going to have evidence in it of other crimes.
Now, is it okay to hold Keyes up to a certain standard or a certain level in as you perceive him? Because if anyone else was performing their job, their day-to-day job, with such efficiency, detail, and effectiveness, they would be promoted. They would be given raises. You'd look at them and say, that person there is the best at their job. Do you think that he was the best at his job of being a serial killer? And does that mean that you can have some sort of admiration for someone like that?
I think that Keyes was very methodical in his planning, but very sloppy in his execution. And I think that gets lost in the translation of this case. I think there is this very rich mythology about Keyes 5 years ago. And it's something that even my team has been wrapped up in from time to time. But like, he made a lot of mistakes. He was really sloppy. Like, this wouldn't even be happening had he not shown his face and talked to some guy while he was out in the area that his cache was, and said things like, I'm visiting from Alaska. My name is Israel. I'm a contractor. Like, he screwed up a lot. I think he had severe social anxiety. So anytime he was around someone who he didn't murder, he made himself obvious. He had an encounter a few weeks before this with a woman in a cemetery that he tried to abduct and failed. And now that places him in the same small town on the same day that a guy there who was camping disappeared. So I don't think he's the big boogeyman that he's been written to be. And I think, like all serial killers, he's human, and much of his life is mundane like the rest of ours. And so, the more you paint someone to be a monster, the more power you give them. And I just think, like, he was a guy who was like slightly above average intelligence, who on paper was methodical, but in actuality wasn't. And a lot of the things he said in terms of how he operated, we haven't really seen evidence of yet. He talked about he always abducted a victim from one state and buried them in another, but the 3 victims we found were all buried in the same state they were abducted from. It just, he has grandiose plans, but I think he rarely executes them to the level that he would like.
How many more seasons do you think you'll be working on Keyes stories?
I mean, like I said, every year I'm like, this is the last one. And when I started this, I said 2 seasons max, and now we're on 6. I don't know. I never want to like drag it out to death. I just feel like as long as there's interesting new information to report on, I will. It does weigh on me. I took a break last year and did a different show on a different true crime case. We have a FOIA out right now that the FBI has said will take 7 years to complete. And my immediate thought was like, if I'm still doing this in 7 years, please take me to a psychologist. So I don't know. I right now I'm committed to doing 1.5 more seasons, and then we'll see what happens after that.
You said you took a break for a little while and you reported on another true crime story. I'm curious if there's anything outside of the true crime genre that you'd ever want to reapproach or take on new for the future.
My very first show was called Our Americana, and it was about...
It's an excellent show.
Thank you. It's my favorite thing I've ever done. It's about how communities grow or adapt or evolve in the wake of compromising or life-changing events. And it's, to me, like mostly uplifting. I think there are 2 sad episodes, but most of it's really positive. I started producing it in 2016, which was obviously a socially fraught time in America.
Nothing important happened in 2016.
Yeah. And it just made me feel good about America. It reminded me that like politics can sometimes feel overwhelming and over encompassing, but like when we as individuals are together, we are usually supporting and rooting for one another. And Our Americana just reminded me of that. And I would love to get back to it. I think it just got to a place where it's a beast to produce. It's just as challenging and takes just as much time to produce as true crime bullshit. But unfortunately, humanities podcasts are not able to put food on the dinner table. But I would love to get back to that. I miss it. We constantly are collecting stories still. I've even conducted a few interviews. It's just about when I find the time, which is limited, as I'm sure you guys are familiar with.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds great. Yeah, definitely let us know when you do get back to producing Our Americana. If you didn't have enough going on with your podcasts, you have added the Berkshire Podcast Festival to your plate. Tell us a little bit about this. When is it? Where is it?
And why do you always schedule it when I've made plans months in advance?
You have not responded to my calendar share request yet, so this is on you. That's not a real thing.
I will mute myself now.
It's October 18th through the 21st here in North Adams, Massachusetts, in Berkshire County. And I moved here in 2020 and fell in love with this area. And I just thought, like, I love podcasting, and as a whole, it feels a little unrepresented or underrated. And I love the Berkshires, and as a whole, it feels a little unrepresented and underrated. So why don't we bring podcasting to the Berkshires, and we can merge these 2 lovely groups of people in like peak fall foliage season. And so, yeah, I also just missed the days, when we all started and it was still such a small community and podcasting hadn't become like highly commercialized yet. It was just like people like us making shows, and now it's an economy, and I feel like we have less power and less community amongst creators, and I wanted to like have that again and across all genres. So I reached out to everyone I knew and was like, hey, this is what we're doing if you want to come. And I kind of thought like 5 people would say yes, but I think we have 50 different podcasters out here, and unfortunately it's mostly true crime. I think the genres have become so segmented that there are fewer cross-genre relationships, but there are a few non-true crime shows. And yeah, I'm just really excited to like hang out with indie producers and talk about podcasting and hang out with each other's listeners and just put on this really cool like all-day show followed by studio tours. If you're into Israel Keyes or true crime bullshit, you can come go through our research library and have like these super intimate conversations with creators. Aaron and Justin from Generation Y are going to do a like weird cases conversation with like 30 people where you sit in a round table and they'll present a case and people can talk about their theories and ideas. It's going to be a really cool grassroots intimate event. I'm so excited for it.
Very cool. And is this something that you're planning on doing annually or every once in a while?
We'll see. I've been told that I've been too transparent about things, but it's a ton of work and we haven't broken even yet. So we'll see what I remember in a year from now and how good it feels. But I think probably not annual, maybe like biannually or semi-annually. But yeah, I guess it just depends on the outcome. But right now, I'm super excited. I think the roster of podcasters, Sans 2, who will be here, or Sans 2 are going to be incredible. And yeah, I just, I'm excited. And I think right now it feels like the benefit outweighs the work and the cost. So I think it'll be cool to have people here talking about podcasting for a weekend.
Can you go down the roster of who's going to be attending? Because you got quite a lineup.
Yeah, we've got Justin and Aaron from Generation Y. We've got Bob Ruff from Truth and Justice. We have right now Lucy from Wine and Crime, but Amanda just got a little a hole in her schedule, so we're trying to strong arm her into coming at the last minute. We've got Charlie from Crime Lines. We've got LA Not So Confidential, True Crime Cases with Lainey, Robin Warder from The Trail Went Cold. We've got me and my whole team. We've got the Somewhere in the Pines team. We've got The Only One in the Room, which is one of our few non-true crime shows, which is just about having the experience of being the only one thing in a room. So it started with this woman where she was at an event and realized, oh, I'm the only Black person here. I'm the only person who's had this experience. And so now she has this beautiful podcast where she interviews various types of the only person in a room and what it's like to experience that. We've got Navigating Advocacy. We've got True Consequences. The list just goes on and on. We're going to do a live reading of the Karen and Ellen letters, which is a like comedic investigative podcast. So yeah, it's a very cool lineup with a lot of, all of our shared friends and just really, really solid, great people who do great work.
Very cool. And is it at the studio?
No, so it's at Greylock Works, which is this old mill in town that they've turned into a multi-use space. There's a restaurant, a couple bars, some shops, and then this giant event in their old fabric dyeing warehouse. So it's this beautiful mill with skylights and hardwood floors, and it's gorgeous. So that'll be cool. And then that's the main event. And then for VIP tickets and a la carte tickets on Sunday, everything's down at the studio. So it's a little more intimate, a little quieter. We're going to do cocktails and pastries and do mini true crime sessions.
So jealous. I'm so mad. This sounds great. God.
We got to stop planning things without talking to me first.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors. And now we're back to the program.
What's the Karen and Ellen letters? You mentioned that, and you also mentioned the Somewhere in the Pine show. Can you give a little bit of a synopsis on each one of those shows?
Yeah. So the Karen and Ellen letters is my show. I took a break right before True Crime Bullshit and did this. Basically, when I turned 24, some woman I worked with, who I didn't know that well, handed me like a file folder and just said, trust me, this is going to change your life. And I opened it and it was 3 years worth of handwritten letters between a landlord and his two tenants. And the two tenants are young women who I think it's their first time living on their own, and they are very demanding and clearly lack a general understanding of how landlord-tenant relationships work. They're asking for insane stuff. They want him to buy them a vacuum. They keep killing all the fish in his koi pond. And the letters just escalate and escalate over time. And he, in the letters, comes off as this like sassy but exhausted landlord who like simultaneously is tickled by these girls, but also doesn't have the patience for them. It eventually leads to like possible crimes, lawsuits, And it gets so insane that you're like, these letters can't be real. This has to be made up. So I spent about a decade trying to authenticate the letters. And that's what the show is. We have actors reading the letters, and then the narration is my journey to find these people out in the wild and see how much of these letters are real. And it ends, I mean, I was doing the investigation in real time while recording the podcast. So as we were producing, we didn't know how it was going to end. And it ends in the most magnificent way ever. Like, I think it starts about this with the story where you're laughing at these two stupid girls, and then it ends in a way that where it just comes full circle and has like the most beautiful narrative at the perfect time in the world that we're living in right now.
That's amazing. When these things happen to you, is your first instinct, this is content for something?
Now it is, but back
Yeah.
then, like, I didn't even know what a podcast was. But yeah,
Right.
I'm constantly like, would this make a good show? Which feels like highly exploitive. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention Somewhere in the Pines, which is produced and hosted by Joshua and Dakota, who became interested in Israel Keys because of my show and another show that had covered him. And they decided they're outdoorsmen. They live in the area that he was most active in. And they were like, we want to go find caches. And so we partnered up because they had incredible instincts. They had a skill set that I didn't have at all. I'm not an out in the woods type of guy. So we started working together, and they were actually integral in the identification of this cache because they just happened to have a meeting with Ted Halla at the time that we were vetting this cache. And so it truly was a collaborative effort, which was really cool. Like I was talking about how indie podcasts have lost a lot of their like power. It was really cool to be like two independent podcasts like came together rather than like trying to square off against each other and made something really cool happen.
Very cool. And are they going to be at the festival as well?
They will, and they're actually they have some new evidence in the Keys case that they're going to do an exclusive premiere live on stage here, so it'll be awesome.
Isn't that wonderful? You were talking about the independent podcasters coming together to collaborate on something to make something better. I just think that's such a wonderful thing. I don't know any other industry really that has that sort of, I don't know, openness. I don't know. Can you think of some like any other media industry that can be that open and collaborative?
No. And I think that's the thing. Like, I always remind myself, we're not in competition with each other. This isn't network TV. Like, people can listen to they can listen to as many shows as they have time in their lives. And so this idea that, two people could be producing the same content would automatically mean they're in opposition of one another is so tired and archaic. It's like, no, we're like two different people with two different narrative styles, with two different skill sets. Like, let's just work together and make some stuff happen. And I think we're seeing that more and more. Sarah Turney is another great example of someone who's willing to like work with other shows. And I think it's really cool. And I think it's the future of independent podcasting. I think it's how we take our power back too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no podcast listener I know who only listens to one show, so there's a lot of room for more introductions to other podcasts.
Totally. And it's like, you'll hear one thing about Keys on my show and another on their show. It's we always say it's a companion podcast. Like no one needs to fight with each other.
Right. There's no like ratings war.
No, totally.
Yeah. The network's not going to cancel us on must-see TV Thursday night because, Somewhere in the Pines is beating us in the ratings.
Also, who even looks at those?
Right. I don't know if I asked you this question in the past. Like that whole hypothetical question, if you could have dinner with somebody, dead or alive, any time period in the world, would your person be Israel Keys, or who would that be for you?
I guess it would depend on when I was offered this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Right now?
No. I would like to think it wouldn't be. I would like to think my life is more than Keys, but I think it's also that like need to know that drives me, where it's like, I don't want it to be him, but I have so many questions I need answered, and I would regret it if it wasn't him, and I would regret it if it was, I guess.
Right, and who's to say he wouldn't just lie to you while you're having dinner,
He definitely would.
He would, yeah.
It's interesting because I think I'm curious, like, what his perception of all this would be, because he was this guy who was so, like, adverse to this happening. Like, I named my show after him being like, I don't want to be caught up in true crime bullshit, and But now I'm like, well, it's done and it's happened. So maybe he's like, I just want to get the record straight, or like, you got this wrong. Or I think the great thing about narcissists is like they never give up the opportunity to talk about themselves. And so I'm hopeful that in this thing that will never happen, that's what would happen.
You mentioned narcissists. It's so wild to me that someone could be a narcissist, but then have what you said, like social anxiety issues. It's a really incredible, like psychological experience when you take a step back and you look at the behavior patterns of him, how he was a narcissist, but had these like social anxiety moments. How do you explain that? Like, how do you like wrap that around in your brain?
I think it's his upbringing. You know, he was raised off the grid. His parents made him sleep in a tent for most of his childhood, like on their property by himself. They went to, you know, extremist churches out in the woods. So the only people he interacted were the same people every single day, day in, day out. He didn't go to school. He only knew the people he knew. And then all of a sudden he goes to the army and at 21 and has to be like a normal social person. So I think he's a narcissist in that he believes that the world revolves around him and thinks he's the smartest, greatest guy in the room. But he also has the self-awareness to know, like, this is not in his skill set. Communicating with people appropriately is not a skill he has. And that's what I'm fascinated by, because the people I presume are narcissists that I've met in the world, they don't seem to have that level of self-awareness.
Very cool, Josh. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. Anything else we should know about the Berkshire Podcast Festival before we go?
Yeah, tickets are still on sale. You can get them at berkshirePodcastFestival.com. Right now, since we're 2 weeks out, we are offering 20% off with the promo code Fall Into the Sound, and Berkshire County residents get 30% off. So I think there are 60 tickets still available. I think there's a handful of VIP tickets still available. So jump on there. The event begins on the evening of the 18th for VIP ticket holders, and the all-day live show is on the 19th for all general admission ticket holders.
What do you get with the VIP?
You get a cocktail party the night before the event. You get premier seating at the event, and then you get to come to the Sunday sessions, which are the small, intimate sessions here at the studios. You'll basically be hanging out, having cocktails, like participating in true crime podcasts with all the podcasters who will be here. So it's going to be a very cool, intimate, like collaborative event.